She's the daughter of synthesis pioneer Bob Moog and the executive director for the nonprofit Bob Moog Foundation. As we approach the 18th anniversary of the foundation, she shares how they are preserving the legacy and inspiration of Bob Moog's instruments. Please welcome Michelle Moog to the Music Production Podcast. This episode is sponsored by Baby Audio, and I want to show you their new exciting vocal plugin called Humanoid. I've got a little vocal here, and this is what it sounds on its own. But it's something I can never do. Lyrics inspired by Terminator 2, it seemed appropriate. And now I'm going to turn on Humanoid. But there's nothing wrong with you. And this is about as tame as Humanoid gets. We'll bring back in the music. And I'm going to quantize the vocals a little more. We can robotify it even further, and we can play with the formants. It's when it hurts, but there's nothing wrong with you. Lots of versatility here with just these few controls. And then the next section allows us to add in some synthesis. So there's a wavetable synthesizer that combines with your voice, and you can choose different waveforms and experiment with those forms as much as you like. And of course, you can always automate this stuff for fun. You can add in a higher octave or a lower octave. Filter this down a bit and even add some fun effects, a widen and a warble. There's a freeze, which is really cool. So just engage that, and then there's a buffer you can play with. Very versatile plugin here for getting those extreme vocal effects. I know why you cry. Now you might think of autotune as being subtle to extreme effects. Humanoid starts at extreme and goes way beyond that, which is why it's so fun. And a really cool feature is you can use MIDI from your MIDI controller to trigger the notes inside of Humanoid. So I'm going to switch on the MIDI switch here, and I've got push, and I'm going to play this again. And we're going to be able to hear what we can do with our MIDI controller, which is pretty cool. I know why you cry, but it's something I can never do. And by playing the pads on my keyboard, it's when it hurts, I can make my own new melodies. With you. I know why you cry, but it's something I can never do. So you can re-synthesize your parts like you would on a vocoder. I'm going to go back to the scale mode. I know why you cry. So this is Humanoid. I'm just scratching the surface, playing around with it here and having a lot of fun. It's a really cool extreme vocal plugin that takes your vocals to all kinds of cool futuristic levels. So check it out. Go to babyAud.io. That's babyaud.io and check out Humanoid. Use the code MPP15 to save 15% off. The plugin is currently discounted, so this code will get you an extra 15% off. It's a great time to check it out. Humanoid is a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying it, and I think you will too. Go to babyaud.io and use the code MPP15 to save 15%. And Michelle, we are live. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's really great to have you. Of course, you come from a legacy. Bob Moog, Moog Instruments, the synthesizer. It's touched probably just about everyone that would listen to this show, myself included. So it's exciting to talk to you, to learn about that and learn about what you're doing with the Bob Moog Foundation and education and spreading that all around to people.
It's a pleasure and an honor to be here representing this legacy.
Yeah, and special thanks to Francis Prev, who put us in contact. He's been I think one of the most frequent guests I've had. And he's a real treasure of information and a really fun guy to talk to.
He is.
Thanks to Francis. And I know you guys are pretty close.
We are close. We were childhood friends, and he is now on the board of advisors of the Bob Moog Foundation too.
That's cool.
Yep.
I didn't know you were childhood friends, though. That's a nice connection.
Yes. Way back in Williamsville, New York, when Moog music moved from Ithaca to Buffalo.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, the upstate regions. I'm on Long Island myself. So.
Ah, okay.
There's a couple Long Island connections. I think Herb Deutsch was also a friend of mine got to know him, I think, through his music program at the Nassau Community College out here. So yeah, it's cool. All connected in some way.
Yep.
But I wonder if maybe you can tell us about the Bob Moog Foundation, the origins, what you guys are out to do. I think it's a pretty cool story, and with a great cause, nonprofit, and all for helping spread the word.
Yeah, so the Bob Moog Foundation was created actually when my dad passed away, and I hesitate right there because I usually don't refer to him as my dad professionally. And the reason for that is I really think of Bob Moog and my dad as two different people. I didn't really know Bob Moog until my dad passed away, and we're going to get into that in just a second. So if I go back and forth between saying my dad and Bob Moog, I hope your listeners will understand.
Right.
So my dad passed away in August of 2005. And leading up to that, he was ill for about just under 4 months. He had a brain tumor. And at one point, he asked my brother Matthew to set up some kind of mechanism that he could keep in touch with 40 people around the world and just let them know how he was doing. And so my brother set up a page on the caringbridge.com, which is a website for terminally ill and critically ill people, just to keep in touch with, people they love and they want to be current with what's going on with them. And it's a pretty simple interface. There's essentially a journal where the person who's ill can journal out, and a guest book where people can leave their well wishes. So we set up the Caring Bridge just for these 40 people and sent them the link. And one of the people didn't realize that this was supposed to be a private endeavor because we were trying to keep my dad's illness private. It was a very sensitive time for him and for all of us. And one person in the 40 posted the link to this page on a synthesizer chat group. And we got 1,000 hits on the page in a day. So then we put up a password and sent it to everybody and said, please don't share the password. And that worked. But then after a couple of days, Dad actually surprised us and said, you know what? Just take the password down. Just let them come, is what he said. And in the first 7 weeks, there were 60,000 hits on that page. And in the day he died, there were 20,000 hits on that day alone. And, over time, there were over 300,000 people who visited that page. But even more powerful than those numbers for me were the amount of people who left testimonials in the guest book. So instead of, the well wishes, which there were plenty of, and just people letting Dad know that they were thinking of him, there were over 4,000 people who left testimonials about how their lives had been changed or transformed by Bob Moog, the instruments he created, the music from those instruments, by his, humble nature. There were things like, because of Bob Moog, I'm a musician. Bob Moog gave me my creative voice. Because of Bob Moog, I'm an engineer. I met Bob Moog once at a talk, and I was standing in line, and I was so nervous, and I I didn't know what to say to him. And I got up and I asked him some kind of question, which I thought was really stupid. And he put me totally at ease. And he whipped out a pen from his pocket, grabbed a napkin, and wrote me a schematic. And I still have that on my studio wall. And I would come home from taking care of him every night and read these testimonials and just cry, essentially, because that is really how I met Bob Moog, what Bob Moog really meant to the world. And other members of my family had similar experiences. And we decided that, this kind of inspiration doesn't come along all the time, and that it deserved to be carried forward to future generations, for those generations who weren't around in a time when Bob Moog could affect their lives. So that was the genesis for the Bob Moog Foundation. And our mission is to inspire people of all ages and all walks of life through the intersection of science, music, technology, and innovation, which is essentially a mirror image of Bob Moog's life and career itself. And we do that through 3 main projects. The first one is Dr. Bob Sound School, which is our hallmark educational project. We teach little kids, 7-year-olds, about the science of sound through music and technology. Now, this is not a one-time thing where we go in and talk to them for an hour in the auditorium. It's a 10-week curriculum that we have developed over many years that meets state and national standards, but is highly experiential and multisensory. So we teach kids how sound is made, how it travels, and how it's heard. We bring in all kinds of musical instruments to help them with this, including theremins. We bring in technology like oscilloscopes. What we have found is that the kids get super engaged because we are meeting them where their learning facilities are. And we started out teaching in 17 classrooms. We've grown to over 100 classrooms. We teach about 3,000 kids a year. The program has reached 35,000 children in the Asheville area since beginning. And our aspiration has always been to grow the program nationwide. So we are very close to that. We've been developing a custom educational device to be able to do that, which is in its beta testing stage right now. So we are hoping that in the next 12 to 18 months that we can begin to go outside of our local area. The second project is the Bob Moog Foundation Archives, which is a vast and growing collection of archival material of all sorts, from photos to prototype instruments to vintage instruments and schematics and vintage catalogs, desktop notebooks, all kinds of correspondence, and on and on. And we steward this collection, we protect and preserve it so that we can share it. And we share it with journalists and researchers and museums. And of course, then that brings me to our third project, which is the Moogseum, the convergence of our education and archival projects, where we also share the Bob Moog Foundation archives. But the Moogseum is a interactive facility in downtown Asheville, North Carolina, that brings Bob's legacy alive to inspire people in their own lives. And it's full of custom created exhibits that allow people to connect, not only with Bob Moog, but we also have exhibits about the science of synthesis, about modular synthesizers, about the fundamentals of synthesis. We have a large exhibit called the Timeline of Synthesis, which honors 34 innovations in synthesis over a 100-year period, of which 3 are Moog innovations, but the rest are innovations that came prior and after the Moog innovations. So we certainly honor the industry as it has grown over the past 100 or so years. So that is that is how we are accomplishing our mission and carrying Bob Moog's legacy forward into the future.
It's a beautiful thing because I saw your TED Talk about this type of stuff. And one of the things you mentioned was one of your father's greatest moments as a professional was with the creator of the theremin. I think it was Leo Theremin, if I'm not mistaken. Leon Theremin.
Mm-hmm.
So this working with him and, that kind of connection, because that's where he got so much of his inspiration. It's really interesting that that moment was so important to him, especially when you consider all the other, there's so many you could pick from, right? I mean, I would have guessed maybe when the Beatles used the synthesizer on Abbey Road, or who knows what it could have been. There's so many to choose from, but it's that like passing on of inspiration that is so valuable. And for me as a musician, it's the thing I seek out the most and the thing I'm always so grateful for. And one of the reasons I love doing this podcast is because it's kind of like a constant faucet of inspiration that I can turn on. But it's such a precious thing, and it can be hard to come by, and when you need it, it's really nice that you've zoned in on that especially, and you're passing it on, especially to young children. I think is a really cool thing to do, because who knows where that's going to lead to from there.
Yeah, that's what the point of my TED Talk was, how powerful inspiration is, and you've just touched on it. I mean, look at a young Bob Moog who first discovered how to make a theremin when he was 14 years old in the basement of his parents' home. That eventually led him to Herb Deutsch and then to the Moog synthesizer and beyond. So, that does translate into Dr. Bob's Sound School, because although we are teaching kids about the science of sound and trying to inspire them through that, we are also inspiring them to become future scientists. Just to engage with the scientific methodology, which we teach them about, and they even learn about through Bob Moog's notebooks. But also to just be open to the process of having an idea and testing it and seeing what the results are, and being willing to embrace the process of discovery, so that they will continue to do that in their own lives in whatever way that manifests for them, so that we are hopefully creating the future problem solvers of our world. So, yes, inspiration can be very powerful.
And what a good way to bring that to students, because so often science is in the textbook and it's just words and dates and events, and it's you miss out on probably those really exciting moments when people made discoveries. Wow, this is how things work. And to show them hands-on with sound and music. My own experience with music was like that too, where I was in a music class in 7th grade, hated it because it was out of books and we weren't playing music, we were learning about it. And, a year or two later, I'm obsessed with music, playing guitar because I'm doing it, I'm interacting with it. So that kind of way of learning, especially for young kids like that, where they need to get their hands on and be allowed to play. These are often the types of things they're told, don't touch. And then you come in and let them do exactly that. Maybe not with the theremin, I suppose, right? You don't touch that.
Yes, but they do interact with that electromagnetic field, so
yes.
It's close.
Right.
And the cool thing about the theremin is what we use it for is, for those people who may not know, the theremin is a very early electronic musical device invented by Leon Theremin in 1920, and it's essentially a cabinet full of circuitry with 2 antennae, one on the left that controls the volume and one on the right that controls pitch. So we hook theremins up to oscilloscopes, and we teach kids about pitch and amplitude through the theremin. The theremin is such an engaging device because you play it without touching it, that, they can sit there and watch the waveforms change as they are changing them. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, That's a lot more fun. And
Yeah.
even in my own science experience, I remember waves from playing with slinkies and, making kind of like sine waves by shaking them back and forth with someone else.
Well,
That
that's fun
stuff.
too.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
fun. And that makes the connection and much
Yep.
more than the diagram in the textbook ever did.
Right. Or doing worksheets or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a 10-week program, that must be pretty extensive.
It is. It's like almost 60-page curriculum and lesson plans that we provide to the teachers.
Right. Wow. That's exciting. And like you said, like sometimes the assembly thing can be fun and it can open people's eyes, but a lot of times the follow-up isn't there. I'm a high school English teacher myself, so
Oh, wow.
yeah, I can relate to a lot of this in my own experience with trying to bring in like electronic music to the school. I got a bunch of Ableton pushes donated to my school, and it was a little bit of a hard sell because it's not the traditional way of doing music. It's not orchestra. It's not, things like that. But it wound up being a club that we had, and it was so nice to turn on kids that might not be playing trumpet or viola or anything traditional like that, but were still interested in music, and they had a chance to explore it or discover it for the first time. And it's because hands-on,
Yeah.
play, touch, and that's really what we do with music. We play music, right?
Yes, definitely an interactive, creative experience.
Yeah. You mentioned, I don't know if you're allowed to talk about this, but some kind of electronic educational device that's in beta. Are you able to talk about that at all, or is that maybe saved for another time?
Probably best to save it to another time, but I can just say generally, right now we use a theremin hooked up to an oscilloscope. But if we're going to scale the program nationwide, using actual theremins that get transferred from classroom to classroom and asking teachers to hook them up to oscilloscopes and to an amp is not really feasible.
Right.
I've been in classrooms where they've completely avoided using the theremin because the teachers weren't sure how to set it up, even though they had been trained. You have to realize that second grade teachers are generalists. They also have tons of demands on them, in addition to the 22 little bodies and brains that they're taking care of and teaching every day. So we are basically taking that kind of setup and make it into a tool that is tabletop. You turn on one switch and it's ready to go. And right now we're beta testing both a hardware version and a software version.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's nice. Yeah. Because sometimes I know from my experience with equipment in the classroom can be a challenge. Any little change, even for somebody that knows some technical stuff, can be a lot. And also just the stuff gets worn out and damaged in classrooms. I had an electric pencil sharpener for my whole life. I brought it to school one day and it was broken by the end of the day. I was like, I got this when I was your age. It took you guys 3 hours to destroy it.
yes, the wear and tear can
Yeah.
definitely have an effect over time, even over hours, I guess, in your case.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's great. That's really cool that you're finding ways to get around that stuff, because those are challenges, of course, any educational system faces. And I think that's really exciting. And I just love the idea of showing kids that at a young age, opening their minds and seeing practically like what the science is and what this, I mean, I really didn't get to understand that until I was much older, out of school, and just curious about how synthesizers worked and wanted to learn how to use them, and realized that, I learned a lot of this science in school, but I had no idea the connection.
Yeah, and that was part of the impetus for this project, was recognizing that children, even young children at 7 years old, have access to very advanced synthesis on their phones, on their iPads, or their parents' iPads, or sisters and brothers' iPads, that they can very easily explore and play around with without understanding the fundamentals at all. So that's what we're trying to do, is give them some fundamentals so that they have a deeper understanding when they come in, across this amazing technology that allows them so much synthesis at their fingertips.
And that's good too, because most of my students have a cell phone permanently attached in their hands and don't realize some of the cool things like that they can be doing on them. Very nice. You said something that was interesting to me, and I bet a lot of people have this experience, and maybe in your case it's magnified a bit because of your father's fame, but this idea of like the separate people that your parents are. For example, growing up, my parents were both police officers, and you don't really get a glimpse into that life, really, but there were occasions where I'd go to work with them or kind of go to functions, and then you kind of see that other side, and you're like, oh wow, like this is you, but it's not you at the same time. And you start to realize like the different dimensions of your parents as humans. And I suppose this goes for most people we know. We don't see our friends usually at work, or even our spouses in their element. And it's always very eye-opening. The question I'm kind of leading to is, did you, maybe it's looking back even, did you see any of this side of your father coming through in his parenting with you?
A little bit. I will just say in general, he held his career at arm's length from us. So we knew the big picture. Dad invented the Moog synthesizer. He's famous. People know who he is. Sometimes when our friends find out who our dad is, they get all flabbergasted, which is very weird because Dad was very humble, and we lived a relatively modest lifestyle, and humility was definitely a big part of the, as I call it, the Moog family religion. So there were glimpses though, and I would say, if I could just think of a few times where the kind of creative, thoughtful, inquisitiveness came through, in general. I can remember I took piano lessons for a little bit, and I wasn't enjoying it. And I think that my mom was pretty frustrated that I wasn't doing well. And I told her I wanted to quit, and she basically said no. And my dad sat down with me, and we went through playing something very simple, and I wasn't doing well. And he whipped out his yellow pad. This was his favorite tool, was that yellow legal pad.
Right.
And he wrote down the notes like 5 times bigger than they were on the page. And I could play it. And I can remember him saying, "Shirley, Michelle's got a vision issue. That's the problem." So it wasn't, just this dismissive disapproval that your kid just can't play the piano. I was like, what is the problem here? And what's the solution? I mean, that's a very rather scientific approach. And I did wind up requiring glasses for the rest of my life. And it was too late, unfortunately. I already decided I didn't want to play the piano, which I regret now. But, and then another time that came through is when I was taking physical science in 9th grade, and we were learning about pulleys. And I just wasn't grasping all the physics of it. And so I went to talk to Dad because, of course, he had a BS in physics and a doctorate in engineering physics. And I asked him if he could help. And, he was very serious and rather quiet, especially compared to my mom, who was more talkative of the two. And he could be a little intimidating. He had a pretty serious face, and he was a pretty tall guy. And sometimes it was intimidating to go and ask him for help. But with this, I went and asked him for help, and he immediately, like, his guard was let down, and he's like, "Yes, I can help you." And I can remember we went into his workshop where he had a pulley. This is his wood workshop. And, we were down on our knees looking at the pulley. He was explaining everything, and it was all crystal clear after that. So I also think that, that to me is just kind of a reflection of his own curiosity about knowledge, his passion for sharing knowledge, which was, the whipping out his pen and drawing a schematic for the guy who was worried about asking him a question. And just his desire to, to teach people and help them understand, which he did his entire career. So those were two times that I can think I maybe got little glimpses into quote unquote Bob Moog. We never, for example, had a synthesizer in the house. Well, once when I was a teenager, there was a Kurzweil K250 in the house because he was working for Kurzweil at the time. But so not in that way. And some people are like, "Did you used to crawl up in his lap at his workbench while he was, soldering? Did you grow up solder?" There was nothing like that. But these glimpses into, kind of the driving forces that made him the innovator that he was, I definitely saw those from time to time.
That example with reading the music is a really good one. And often with kids in school, there's other things at work that are getting in the way that might not be identified. And they could be anything from, like you said, visual, hearing. It could be just emotional issues, things going on at home. You name it, right? It could be anything. And the approach to see it as kind of like a scientific problem to solve. Okay, let's identify the problem. That's the first step of the scientific method, right?
Yeah.
Like identify the problem. So a lot of people probably skip that step. Just try to find solutions to things they don't even know what they're solving. That's a cool story because it kind of shows that very much.
Yep.
But yeah, it is weird how sometimes, the same with me with having parents that were police officers. They weren't like putting me in jail when I was bad or anything like that, which is what people would ask me too. Like, "Oh my God, what would happen if,
You got pulled over."
Yeah, it's surprisingly normal, actually. But you do see some of those glimpses come out, especially for me, it would be like in situations where someone needed to step forward and take control of emergencies or things like that. Suddenly, like, you're like, wow, okay, like this is what they do. And same thing, take out the pulley. Was he into woodworking and craftsmanship like that as well?
Yes, he was definitely into
Because some of the
craftsmanship.
synthesizers are just beautiful works of art. The first time I saw a Model D, I was like, that's just a beautiful piece of furniture, even on its own. Aside from what it sounds like.
Yes, and I don't think he did know how to do some woodworking. And the reason for that is his father was an electrical engineer, but he was also a very accomplished amateur woodworker. And he had, from all accounts, a quite lovely basement workshop, well equipped with both electronic equipment, some of which would come from his work with Con Edison when they were getting rid of things, and woodworking equipment. And he was part of young Bob's inspiration to get into just tinkering with electronics. Young Bob also had an obvious aptitude for it as well. But when they got into the phase of building theremins, which happened when Bob was about 15, then that's when George, his father, stepped in and built cabinetry for his very early theremins. And they're quite beautiful. We have one of the earliest theremins in the Moogseum, and people remark on how beautiful the cabinetry is. And that's when I tell them, yeah, that was Bob's father. And I think that Bob then carried that whole ethos of wood in and musical instruments forward, because actually the Model 201's the very first theremins were what I would call maybe a medium size for a theremin, and then some of his other theremins were quite a bit larger, and then when transistors came along, of course, the theremins got smaller, but they were always wood cabinetry, always. And when he was making small amounts of them after he moved out of his childhood home and he was getting his master's and his PhD, he would fabricate those cabinets on his own. So he was quoted as saying, "Wood just sounds better."
That's so funny. It's an interesting touch because there really is no reason for it to be there. And funny, you kind of allude to a silly joke I make myself. I have it's a Korg MS-20, the Mini that came out a couple years back. And I bought wood sides for it and replaced the plastic ones. Just
awesome.
I was like, it sounds warmer. It sounds better now.
There you go.
But it's a funny choice to put that wood in there. And it, like so many things about some of these designs that happened 60 years ago, they've just stuck with us. They've become part of the look, part of the layout, part of the design.
Yeah, R.A. Moog Co., the company that's the original company that made the Minimoogs, they actually hired a design firm to come up with concepts for the Minimoog. And those were sent to customers. And customers were asked, which cabinetry do you prefer? And most of them were very space age. Like white molded plastic that was all curved and, very sci-fi. And then there was this one design using, the wood, and that's what people preferred. I mean, I think part of it is that most musical instruments before the synthesizer were made out of some kind of organic material, whether it was wood or some kind of metal. And, with the synthesizer, it has enough of a presence that it almost feels like, it has that kind of permanence like a piece of furniture would. And of course, furniture, is usually has some wood in it as well. So, and plus, it just sounds better.
Yeah, warmer.
It's warmer, right?
It's got an organic vibe.
That's right.
All that stuff we're looking for now.
Yep.
Analog. Yeah, that's cool. And like I said, the first time I saw a Minimoog, I was just like, it has a presence. It if you just had it sitting in your house as a piece of furniture, it'd be cool. So how did your dad get from theremins to synthesizers?
Well, in 1963, his theremin business was fledgling a little bit, and one of his representatives, Walter Sear, who was his New York rep, suggested that he attend the New York State Music Educators Conference, NISMA, in Rochester, New York. Walter actually was importing a line of high-end tubas at the time, so they had an unlikely booth with tubas and theremins in it. And Walter wasn't there, but Bob was, and apparently not too many other people were at that booth. Not too surprisingly, I guess. The music teachers were not flocking to the tubas and the theremins. But Bob was approached by a guy named Herb Deutsch, who introduced himself and said, I am a music professor at Hofstra University, and I use your Melodia theremin for ear training. But I'm also an experimental jazz composer, and there are just sounds that I want to make for my compositions. And the technology, the tape splicing, etc., it just isn't there. Do you think you could make a musical instrument that could help make these sounds for my compositions? And so they embarked on this conversation that lasted, throughout the end of 1963 and into 1964. And by the end of, the summer of 1964, Herb was able to secure a $200 support from Hofstra University to go to Ithaca, New York, where Bob was situated, where R.A. Moog Co. was, and work with Bob for 3 weeks during the summer to see if they could create something interesting. And so up he went with his family. They rented a cabin in the state park that was close by, and every day Herb would come in and work at R.A. Moog Co. with Bob. And it was the beginning of this symbiotic relationship that would continue for the rest of Bob's life, which was the musician telling him what they needed and him building it. So Herb would say, well, this is what I want. And so Bob would build a simple circuit, and Herb would say, I need more of this or less of this. Okay, this is good. Now I need this. So, before the end of the 3 weeks, they had what would become the prototype of the Moog synthesizer, which was eventually created in 1960, later in 1964, and actually sent to Herb in 1965. But that was really the birth of the Moog synthesizer, and the, Moog legacy obviously owes a debt of gratitude to Herb Deutsch for being the catalyst. And, Herb also was a pretty humble guy, and he would always say, if it wasn't me, it would have been somebody else who came along. But that's not where Herb Deutsch's involvement stopped with the Moog legacy. He, in addition to, persevering over a couple of years period to helping Bob show the modular synthesizer around and getting other people's feedback, he also helped conduct seminars in 1965 and 1969 to acquaint people with the Moog modular. He went on to advise parameters of the Minimoog. He then, at a later time, actually when Bob was not at Moog Music, but he was part of Moog Music, and he was part of sales and marketing. He actually created the Moog Opus 3. And he and Bob were lifelong friends and colleagues. So Herb Deutsch is how Bob Moog jumped from theremins into synthesizers. He had no idea about synthesis in any kind, and at that point really thought he was going to spend his life selling theremin kits and theremin parts and assembled theremins.
Isn't it amazing? One chance meeting like that?
Yes.
And it goes to show, you have to put yourself out there.
Yes.
You have to talk to people. And that's another great example of inspiration. Two sets of different inspirations coming together. Meeting somewhere in this weird outer space middle of synthesis. Very
and
cool.
just being open to the discussion,
Right.
and yep.
But you can kind of see that in a lot of these moves that brought us to where we are now. Some of the flexibility in it, the open-mindedness, the being okay with maybe taking those designs from the modular to something a little more compact for everyday person, everyday musician to understand. Really, I could see how a lot of creatives would be very rigid and hard to sway into other directions like that, but to be able to go with that and trust it and see where it takes you is another kind of exciting part of this whole journey.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The musicians were certainly Bob's inspiration.
Inspiration is like a powerful feedback loop. It's part of the beauty of playing music with other people, having conversations with other people, interacting with other people. Sometimes I feel like we've gotten very isolated, even though we're more connected than ever. It's easy to just kind of, even as a musician, you can make a whole song by yourself, play every instrument, program everything. But when you work with other people, they fire off things you would have thought of that make you think of new things that you never would have thought of that then get passed on to them. And it's very evident in this story of the birth of the synthesizer.
Yep. In so many ways.
Very cool.
Yes.
Maybe this is a good segue to the Moogseum to learn a little bit about that. You could tell us about how it is, what it's like, and how it came to be.
So the Moogseum is something we've wanted to bring alive since the beginning of the foundation in 2005, 2006. But it took us a while to be able to build up the funding for it. And we were finally able to do so in May of 2019. We opened the Moogseum on May 23rd of that year, which was Bob's birthday. And it's a modest size museum, but it's packed with information. We have a couple timelines, one of which I've already mentioned. The other one is our Bob Moog timeline. And the cool thing about those timelines is there are tons of photos on the wall that kind of tell the story, but then we have these touchscreen interfaces that, one of them holds 700 pieces of archival material. The other one holds 400 pieces of archival material. You can really do a deep dive into any subject matter you want. With the Bob Moog timeline, it's divided by year. With the timeline of synthesis, it's divided per synthesizer. When we have true synth geeks in, they usually wind up just sitting on the floor in front of the timeline of synthesis and going through every single piece of information, because we have audio samples of some of the earliest musical instruments like the telharmonium and the Owens Martineau and et cetera, right up, to the Haken continuum, which is the last development we have. We also have an interactive, immersive demi-dome that teaches you how electricity turns into sound when it's traveling through a circuit board. So it's a 6-minute presentation that you watch, and then we have a knob interface where you can actually interact with the circuitry components and see how that changes them, kind of based on what you've learned in the presentation. We, of course, have theremins and synthesizers for you to learn much more about how those instruments are made, how they work, what their essential parameters are, and how they're played. Our latest addition to the Moogseum is our Patching Sound exhibit, where we feature a 1967 Moog modular that was used on the soundtrack of Apocalypse Now, which we fully restored. But we didn't just want it to be there for people to look at, and we certainly couldn't make it available to play because we get about 10 to 11,000 people through the Moogseum every year. So those things are delicate enough that you don't want to expose them to that much wear and tear. So we created smaller exhibits that teach people how to patch a modular synthesizer. They essentially look like eight or so modules on the interface that teach people about oscillators and filters and envelope generators and mixers, etc. But on the back end, they're actually Cherry Audio's voltage modular. So, so that we don't expose discrete components to lots of wear and tear. And people love that because it's the one thing about the Moogseum is we make it accessible to anybody. There's something there, of course, for synth geeks, but there's something there for the total lay person. And I really feel like that's one of the ways that I was able to have the biggest impact in the Moogseum was actually not knowing that much about the subject matter that my father worked on his whole life. A lot of times I'm a bit embarrassed about, not knowing a lot about deep synthesis or music production or audio engineering. But in this instance, it really served me because I would have to kind of rein in the exhibit designers. At least, there were over half of our exhibit designers, I would say 75% of them, were synth geeks who are also exhibit designers. And I would have to rein them in. It's like, you can't just say the word oscillator and expect people to know what it means. Yeah. Back up and explain it. So that has served us very well. And that's one of the things I'm the most proud of, is that anyone can come in and really learn so much. It's really, it's totally self-guided experience, and people can really pick up as much as they're up for. We have people who go through the Moogseum in 20 or 30 minutes and kind of do a cursory experience, but most people stay for at least an hour. A lot of people are in there for a couple hours, and of course we have people who are in there for 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah, I can imagine some people you probably have to ask to leave after a while.
At closing time,
so
yes.
Yeah.
But we love it. I mean, there's reports from who's ever working at the counter that day. It's like they always share, we had someone in here who was in here for like 3 hours today. They were so excited. They were so inspired. I mean, we love it. We thrive off of that. And it's so rewarding. And just knowing that we are doing what we set forth to do, and that those people will take that experience with them, probably through the rest of their lives in one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a very specific thing, very niche. And to have something that's dedicated to that is really exciting. It's a fun place to be. Like, this is right up my alley type of thing. I love what you said about having to rein people in. I mean, that's an important perspective to have. It's so easy to forget what you know, kind of, when you start talking about this stuff. I mean, I run into this a lot when I'm talking about like a song I'm making and start talking about like a compressor or something, and what? Like already you're in like another language. But to remember and to keep that perspective, and that's also great for introducing new people to this, and then who may one day become those kind of obsessive knowledgeable people in all these different aspects. But they have to start somewhere. Everybody does. So to have that door open is important.
Yeah, I think my favorite example happened the first weekend the Moogseum was open. We kind of like slid into home base just in time with opening the Moogseum. And, we're a fairly small organization, and we were a team of essentially 3 people that worked with all the exhibit designers, the architects, and the construction crew to create the Moogseum. And so by the time we actually opened our doors on May 23rd, I think it wasn't until we opened at 11, at 11:37, the last construction worker left after replacing some glass because it was supposed to be installed days earlier, but the sizing was wrong. And in any case, I was in the Moogseum with the Moogseum manager that weekend, and just to help and make sure everything was going smoothly, but also I was the one who was setting up all the social media because we hadn't done that yet. And so I was at the counter with him, and this young couple came up to the counter, and they had just, right before the counter is our hands-on synthesis exhibit that breaks down synthesis into its component parts. So you have a digital Minimoog interface and a knob interface, and there's audio and text that basically explains to you, this is a Minimoog, this is what it does. We're going to divide this off into its component parts, go essentially across the interface, and explain to you how this works. So it and it's all self-guided. You don't go to the next step until you press. It's like, it starts off with what's an oscillator, and you learn that, and then you don't only learn about it, but then you can play on the keyboard. You can control the knob interface that's connected to it. And it's not until you understand what an oscillator does that then you go on to, what's an envelope? What's a filter? What are harmonics? What's control voltage, et cetera, et cetera. And this couple spent quite a bit of time there. And when they came up to the counter, she said, we're from Canada and I'm in a band and I'm a singer. And our keyboardist has always said to me, you should get a synthesizer. I think you'd be really good at it and you could use it, we could incorporate it into our music and you could play while you're singing or you could play when you're not singing. And she said, I've always just been too scared of synthesizers, so I've never done it. She said, but now I get it and I'm going to go get a synthesizer.
Wow.
And I was like, okay. Day 2 at the Moogseum, my job here is done.
Right. Oh, man.
So
that's really cool.
It is cool. When you take away those barriers, powerful things happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and that was day 2. I mean, I can't imagine how many people, and probably lots of people you never hear from.
Yeah.
That walk in there and walk out and say like, hey, this is doable. I could figure this out.
We've had 40,000 people through the Moogseum.
Really?
Yep, from all over the world.
Wow.
Yep.
That is cool. I'm sure there's a percentage there that were turned on, switched on, right?
Yep.
When I first saw synthesizers in my world as a guitar player, I didn't know what the heck they were, all the knobs. I was afraid to turn them, and if I did, suddenly I didn't hear anything. Don't know why. I have no idea. But as you start to learn a little bit and you see it, especially in something that's a little more compact, laid out nicely, it's interesting to me how that ever came to be, that layout. Like, take the Minimoog layout, which is kind of stuck around in pretty much everything that comes out. It's there. You learn that, but I came across like modular stuff later, and I still don't. That's still kind of foreign to me. I haven't taken that dive yet. I don't think I would be able to afford that, that rabbit hole of. But that's how it started, which is kind of the funny thing to me, because that's like something you come to later, a lot of people, because they learn the basics on something that's kind of put together. But it blows my mind that all of that stuff, all those individual components, the oscillators, the envelopes, the filters, were separate things that were then put into this really clever packaging that people could actually understand without engineering degrees. They can just play with, and the controls are set up in a certain way. I mean, how many things, if you really think about it, have that kind of legacy over such time that just keeps repeating? Because it's just kind of the best thing we know.
It is astounding to me, the staying power of the Minimoog. With all the technological leaps and bounds that have been made since 1970, that the Minimoog endures in the way it has. Of course, other Moog instruments have as well, including the modulars. But the Minimoog is really, is considered the most iconic analog synthesizer of all times, even now. So there's something to, and it's interesting, the way it came about was because one of the engineers at Moog Music, who actually was R.A. Moog Co. at the time, started there in 1969, and one of his jobs was to demonstrate to musicians who would come through how the modulars worked. And he found he was constantly setting up like the same kind of patches. So on his lunch break, he took some of the modules from what they called the graveyard, which was an upstairs room in the attic where they would just throw spare parts. And he just went up there and got some modules that maybe had some small defects and put together what they called the Min A. And it was just actual modules that you patch together, but in a little tiny cabinet with a small little cutoff keyboard. And that, his coworkers thought, you might have something here. So then Min B, they hardwired it. So you didn't have to patch the modules together, but it was still pretty rudimentary. Meanwhile, Bob was resisting this the entire time, thinking that it looked like a toy, really resisting the notion of taking this technology that he provided with the goal of providing musicians with the widest sonic palette possible. A large Moog modular system could produce 250,000 new sounds. So when your whole ethos is expanding the sonic universe for musicians, and then the direction seems to be minimizing that, I think it kind of went against his creative ambitions. But after a while, he had to recognize that practically this was the way to go. So it was at the Min C that he jumped in, and he's the one who created the interface. So that interface that so clearly lays everything out, that was Bob's biggest contribution to the Minimoog. Of course, the Minimoog is based on the modulars that he developed. So he's inherently in the heart of the circuitry as well. But, and then the finished product was the Model D.
Incredible. Yeah, I could see how that would be a little bit against what you're trying to do. But yeah, the practicality of those modulars, and
right.
It's kind of like what you were saying with your beginner's mindset to synthesis. He's coming at this as a doctorate in physical science, right? And
doctorate in engineering physics.
Okay, right.
Right.
So he's pretty far down the road here, and that understanding is just beyond almost everybody's grasp. Yeah, I could see how that would be a conflict, but ultimately something, if we're going to reach, musicians who don't have time to get their doctorate, they're trying to just, put together some cool sounds for a new album. Yeah, a much more practical approach, and incredible that, you can pick up an iPad today, futuristic touchscreen device, and find recreations of that design. Just
many of them, yes.
Right? You'd think we'd find something else maybe, but no, sometimes things just work and just make sense.
Yeah, and not only for your iPad, but even for your phone. Those apps work on the phone too.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. That's really cool stuff. And at the heart is really like all that inspiration you were talking about and you spoke about in the TED Talk, which is it. I guess you must see this all the time, right? Just where people are constantly feeding off of this, and the new things they come up with have their roots in these things that happened so long ago. Do you have a favorite, either like synthesizer or use of the synthesizers? Anything stick out to you personally?
There are so many. It's really hard to.
So this is your favorite child kind of question.
Yes. Keith Emerson and Rick Wakeman are both friends, and or were both friends. In Keith's instance, just kind of the pioneering usage of the way Keith used the modular and Rick used the Minimoog. Certainly stick with me. Jan Hammer was an incredible technician and creative vessel for the Minimoog. Chick Corea and these people, and actually I should mention Herb Deutsch, and we should probably talk about him a little bit more, even things that he was able to do when people didn't know what could be done with these instruments. These people are pioneers in and of themselves, grasping onto this new technology that had not truly been harnessed yet, and figuring out how to integrate that into the music that already existed. It's phenomenal, you know. So I have a very special place in my musical heart for Eric Norlander, who I met very early on in my work with the Bob Moog Foundation when I was still learning about Bob Moog and his impact. And I met him at Moogfest in 2007, and he gave me all of his CDs, and I went home and listened to them as I was working. And I just had this huge dawning of how these instruments could be used, because we never really played that kind of electronic music, synthesized music at home. My mom was heavily into classical, and we lived way out in the country, so the only radio station we got was country radio. And, you know, my dad never imposed anything on us. So my sister was a big fan of like John Denver and James Taylor, and my other sister didn't know, you know, wasn't into music that much. And, you know, I found that a lot of people learn about music from their siblings, and I didn't have that.
Yeah.
So, you know, when Eric handed me his CDs, he's both a incredibly skilled musician, but he's also worked on synthesizer design teams. So he really understands synthesizers inside and out, both technically and creatively. And he makes very heavy use of the Moog synthesizers. And when I would listen to his music, it was a dawning for me of a more expansive dawning of what could be done with these instruments. And, you know, what I told him is when I was a kid, my dad's rhythm was he'd go to work, or you know, during the day he'd work normal working hours, come in for dinner. My mom was a great cook, so we always had a nice dinner together. Then they would both take a little nap, and then my dad would go back out to the workshop until like 11 o'clock at night or later. And so if we wanted to go say goodnight to him, we had to go out to the workshop and give him a kiss goodnight. And in the time where we lived in North Carolina, you know, I would go padding across the driveway and in my pajamas and go over to his workshop, which was in a separate building. And before I would open the door, I would just stand there and listen. And he'd be, you know, testing out sounds on the oscilloscope and, you know, doing things that, you know, through the keyboard, through a pitch wheel, whatever it was. And I would just sit there and think, what is he doing in there? Like, I really didn't know how what he was doing could be applied. And it was Eric's music that brought that all together for me. So, yeah, and you know, there are countless others as well. You know, Lisa Belladonna, more recent incredible synthesist who interweaves so many different kinds of synthesizers into her work, and is very deep synthesist. You know, definitely has a special place in my musical heart as well. So, you know, the person who really stands out for me in using the Moog synthesizer, though, is Wendy Carlos, and the breakthrough that switched on Bach was in 1968. She really took the Moog synthesizer from being used more or less as a sound effects in popular music to showcasing it as a true musical instrument. And that was not easy to do. She's a fascinating woman who's an incredible musician, but she's also has a very adept technical mind. And it was that pairing that allowed her to bring the Moog synthesizer to the fore as she did. And she shared with me that on Switched on Bach, it would take her 20 minutes just to do 8 or 9 notes. And that she was constantly, you know, on the floor repatching. And that record, Swiss Schambach, went on to inspire so many people that came after her. From Isao Tomita to Keith Emerson that was his first connection to the Moog synthesizer was Swiss Schambach. And hundreds and thousands of others at Swiss Schambach went on to sell over 1 million copies. Of course, she went on to create other incredible soundtracks for Clockwork Orange and The Shining, but also many, many other albums, including Beauty and the Beast, which is a microtonal album that Bob said was his favorite album of all times. So again, there's Wendy Carlos inspiring a whole generation or generations of people of what can be done with a Moog synthesizer.
Yeah, and to think about that, I didn't know it took 20 minutes to make 8 or 9 notes. And this is all, think of the recording process too, the tape. We're not sequencing in computers here. What an undertaking and what an important effort. Thank goodness somebody spent that time to create those 8 or 9 notes at a time to just show the world, look what you can do with this thing.
Yes, and that's where we come back again to these early musicians were pioneers in their own right.
Absolutely.
So, and there are just countless others, people doing so many fantastic things with synthesizers across so many different genres.
Yeah, it's true. And those are great examples. And really cool how it connected those 2 times in your life when you're standing outside in your pajamas, wondering, what is going on in there?
Yep.
And then seeing the connection.
It's like, oh yeah, now I get it. Probably 30 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I could understand. I know questions are asked about what the heck I'm doing down here. Sometimes when just weird noises are coming out. There's been a few occasions my wife has come down and been like, what are you doing? This thing playing over and over again. I promise it makes sense. Or sometimes I'll just like, you know what? I don't know. It's very neat. Let's see. We got the Moogseum, but the foundation, the archives, but there's also some good ways to support what you guys are doing. And that's really important because as you've clearly highlighted, and I'm sure as everyone already knows, it's impossible to measure that kind of value, what inspiration is worth, what it is to pass that on to other people. All of us that are here doing any kind of music have been inspired, and that's probably why we're doing it. And to pass that on is so important. There's some nice ways people can support what you're doing and also support their own work through that kind of those efforts. Do you want to mention any of those?
Yes, absolutely. But I'd like to preface the mentioning of those things by just making it clear for people that the Bob Moog Foundation is purely driven by donations. For those who have read anything about Bob Moog, you know that he was a brilliant engineer, but not nearly as brilliant of a businessman. So it's not like he left funding for this to happen. He did not. We started off with nothing. We really grew this from bootstraps. The other thing is that, just to be clear, that the Bob Moog Foundation is completely separate from Moog Music. So we're completely separate entities. Moog Music, of course, makes a fantastic instruments, but the Bob Moog Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit that carries forth our mission through our 3 main projects. So the funding of the foundation and having as many people as possible participate in that is so important. And it is funding, of course, that absolutely fuels our work. And without it, our work suffers. And we have been through periods where we were not able to generate as much funding as we needed, and we've had to like contract. And there were points early on that we were actually worried about even being able to sustain what we're doing. So, just to say, supporting the Bob Moog Foundation is vitally important to everything we do. So there are some really fun ways to do that. I mean, of course, there's donating through our website, which is always very impactful. We also have memberships to the Bob Moog Foundation at various levels that give you all these kind of cool perks and rewards that have to do with tours and merch. But we've been very fortunate that there have been some generous companies in the industry who have really wanted to support us as much as they possibly could. And they have created sound banks for us. One of them is Spectrasonics, who developed the Bob Moog Tribute Library. It was the Tribute Library V1 in 2011, but then they came out with a V2 a few years ago. So this is a sound bank of over 1,300 sounds. That does have to be used with Omnisphere. And that is just an incredible product that has meant so much to the Bob Moog Foundation. I'm honestly not sure if we would still be in existence without Spectrasonics. They donate 100% of the proceeds from that sound bank to us. Motu also has the Bob Moog Foundation Encore Sound Bank that they produced many years ago. Then Native Instruments came out with a sound bank called Modular Icons, where a variety of modular synthesizers were sampled, including Tonto, which is an incredible synthesizer that is housed up at the National Music Center in Calgary, Canada. And you mentioned Francis Prev at the beginning of the conversation. I asked him to come up there with me, and he is the one who actually did the programming for that sampling session, which was incredible. And for those of you who don't know about Tonto, was created by Malcolm Cecil and Bob Margoloff, but mostly Malcolm, and it was a it's a combination of many different kinds of synthesizers, of modulars and ARP 2600s and Oberheims. And Malcolm's genius was that he made that all work together with some special modules and components that he made himself. There are other modules in there as well. If you don't know about it, read about it, but it's this incredible system. And Tonto, along with many, many other modulars, were sampled for Modular Icons. And so that is available through Native Instruments. That also benefits us. We're very grateful to them. And then most recently, not a company, but Alex Ball, who many of your listeners probably know. He has this huge YouTube following. He is a wonderful synthesist and teacher about both the history and the technology around synthesizers. And he created a sound bank for us called Vox Humana, which is based on the Polymoog keyboard setting that is so coveted. And that is available on our website, on our online store at moogfoundation.org. So the purchase of any of those sound banks benefits the foundation quite a bit and really helps us out. And the one other thing I would mention is that we also hold raffles 3 or 4 times a year for usually vintage Moog instruments, usually Minimoogs, sometimes memory Moogs, and we just raffled off a Source that was signed by Bob. Those raffles also are critically important to our funding and to help us provide all the innovative work that we do.
Yeah, that's really cool that you've got the support from some great companies and great people as well.
Absolutely. We're super grateful for that.
On my episode I did with Francis Prev a couple weeks ago, we used a picture of him in front of Tonto looking like a kid in a candy store, Looked like he said he had the time of his life with that.
Yes, it was
Yeah.
just very special experience.
Yeah. And really cool that you can get some of that, right in your, that was Native Instruments, I believe, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So then that pack. Yeah. So cool that you can play with those sounds in your own music.
Yeah, and Native Instruments, I think, is the only company right now among all of those who just started a subscription service. So they're making all of their instruments more accessible to people.
Hmm.
So
Very nice. I hadn't heard about that. That's cool. Yeah, and definitely the raffles are exciting, and it's a great way to maybe get lucky, but also really support great cause. I love it. I think it's a really cool world. It's a great tribute to your father, to Bob Moog, and passing on that inspiration, I think might, from what I'm gathering, might be the thing he would appreciate the most of this. And recognizing how important that is to us all to be inspired and to give that to the next generation who will in turn inspire us as well with what they do.
Exactly. And those who come after them. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have people say to me, do you think your dad would like the Moogseum, or do you think your dad would like a foundation named after him? Because he was so humble.
Mhm.
And it's like, it might make him a little uncomfortable, but when he saw the effect of Dr. Bob's Song School, when he saw the effect of the people coming out of the Moogseum, I think he'd totally get it, as you say. Just passing that inspiration forward, that, the knowledge, the vehicles for people to jump in and be curious and, discover new information. That's what he was all about.
Really cool. And I'm really glad you're doing all that work. I know it's not easy and takes a lot of time and energy, and it's important work. So I'm really happy you're doing it, especially the stuff with the School of Sound for the children. That I think is especially important. The sound school. It's that's gonna pay dividends who knows how long down the road. So thank you for doing all that.
You're welcome. And I will just say, as we begin to wrap up here, that if people want to find out more about us, they can go to moogfoundation.org or moogseum.org. And if they want to find out more about Bob Moog, a couple of years ago, Albert Glinsky released the definitive biography called Switched On, Bob Moog and the Synthesizer Revolution, which is available on our online store. It is an incredible read that even I learned a lot from. Albert Glinsky spent 12 years researching Bob Moog's life and career, interviewed over 65 people, went through thousands and thousands, if not tens of thousands of documents. And the result is a portrayal of Bob Moog like most people have never seen him. So I would encourage people who are interested to pick up that book.
Yeah, that sounds like a fun read.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to put all this stuff in the show notes, so if people check on those, they can click on the links and get to the packs, get to the website, get to everything we've talked about. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Well, thank you, Brian. It's my honor to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much. And again, thank you for your work. I think it's important work. I'm leaving this conversation feeling inspired myself, so I personally appreciate it very much.
I am so glad. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Music Production Podcast. If you want to help support the show, the best thing you can do is tell a friend, someone you think that would enjoy the show. I'd also love it if you could leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to support my work, you can go to brianfunk.com. I've got tons of Ableton Live packs, tutorials, samples. You can check out my book, The 5-Minute Music Producer, which gives you 365 short music-making activities to help you get started, stay inspired, and finish more music. And there's also the Music Production Club, where you get my latest releases as soon as they're finished. It gives you access to a community of like-minded people who are making music and sharing ideas. You can share your music, find new collaborators, and participate in our live meetings where we set up some kind of musical challenge and then make music together and share our results at the end. That's the Music Production Club. It's a lot of fun, and you can find that and everything that I do at brianfunk.com. Thanks again for listening to the show, and have a great day.